She bought lunch for a stranger with her last dollar, not knowing he was the new CEO of the company she was interviewing with. The rain had eased into a soft drizzle, painting the sidewalk in mirrored glints of grey and yellow from passing cars. Riley Morgan pulled her coat tighter around her slim frame, her blonde hair damp and sticking slightly to her cheeks. In one hand, she clutched a folded, slightly crumpled resume. The ink had started to bleed at the edges, but she kept holding it like it was made of gold. Another interview, another chance maybe. Her stomach growled loud enough for her to hear she had skipped breakfast again. She glanced into her wallet while waiting at the crosswalk. $4.16. She could buy a coffee or save it for the bus, but that was it. The light changed. She stepped forward, her boots splashing slightly in a shallow puddle. Just outside the corner deli, she saw him. A man middle-aged in a wrinkled shirt and faded jeans had slipped on the wet pavement. A brown paper bag had burst beside him. A sandwich and drink scattered, soaked. He winced as he tried to stand, hand cradling his side. People passed him. No one stopped. Riley didn't hesitate. She jogged over, kneeling beside him. "Are you okay?" He looked up, surprised. Rain had darkened his hair and soaked through his sleeves. I think so. Just bruised my pride, mostly." She offered her hand, steadying him as he stood. He dusted off his pants, glanced at the ruined lunch on the ground, then gave a small, self-deprecating chuckle. "Well, there goes my lunch." Without a word, Riley turned and walked into the deli. A few minutes later, she emerged with a bottle of water and a fresh turkey sandwich in a wax paper wrap. She handed them to him. He blinked. "Miss, no, I can't accept that. You don't need to." She smiled, tired but kind. "You look like you need it more than I do." He took it hesitantly, still stunned. Then came the question. Quiet, curious, honest. "Why would you do that?" he asked. "You don't even know me." Riley's smile softened, her voice low. "I've been the one lying on the ground. I know how it feels." There was a long pause. Then he nodded, clearly moved. "Thank you," he said. "Truly." She nodded once, shoved her hands into her coat pockets, and turned to go. He called after her. "What's your name?" She hesitated, then over her shoulder. "Riley." "Thank you, Riley," he said again. But she had already merged into the crowd. She didn't look back. If she had, she might have seen him watch her walk away with a strange look in his eyes, something between wonder and regret. Riley's pace slowed as she rounded the next corner and stepped under a dry awning. She pulled out her wallet again, empty. 4 coins, that was all. The rumble in her stomach returned, louder now. Her coat clung to her from the drizzle. She shook her head, exhaled deeply, and looked up at the tall glass building ahead of her. Vale Cororp, her interview. The building loomed like a monument, sleek, intimidating. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass door, wet hair, tired eyes, and a paper-thin folder hugging her chest like armor. She took a deep breath. Then she pushed the door open and walked in. Inside the lobby was warm, bright marble floors, smells of coffee and citrus cleaning products. People in tailored suits moved with confidence. She approached the front desk. "Hi," she said. "I'm here for a 100 p.m. interview, Riley Morgan." The receptionist gave a brief nod, scanned a list, and smiled. "Yes, you're on the list. Elevator to the 22nd floor." Riley nodded, murmured a thank you, and turned toward the elevator. As the doors slid shut behind her, she looked at her reflection again in the polished metal. She didn't have lunch, she didn't have money, she didn't have a clean record, but she still had her name, and for now, have to be enough. The elevator chimed softly as Riley stepped onto the 22nd floor of Vale Corp. The carpet beneath her worn boots felt too plush, too clean, as if each step she took left behind an invisible shadow of doubt. The receptionist gestured toward a glass-walled waiting area filled with a few other applicants, sleek, confident, impeccably dressed. Riley smoothed her hair in the reflection of a glass panel, tucking the damp strands behind her ears. She hugged the folder to her chest again, as if it could protect her. Across the floor, behind a tinted wall, a figure stood with a tablet in hand, watching. Ethan Vale, CEO. He wore a tailored jacket now, no longer the weathered flannel shirt or scuffed boots from earlier that day, but his eyes hadn't changed. They were still observant, still quietly searching, and he saw her. The same woman who had handed him her last sandwich, eyes heavy with exhaustion, but voice still steady with kindness. She had walked away without asking for anything, not even his name. He hadn't expected to see her again, not here. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then slowly, he turned away. He would listen first, learn who she was when she thought no one was watching. Riley sat down in the waiting area. Her fingers toyed with the edge of her resume, worn from the rain and her grip. She glanced at the other candidates, each scrolling confidently on their phones, portfolios gleaming, laughter light. She felt like a smudge on clean glass. A voice called her name, Riley Morgan. She stood quickly, following a woman in a dark green suit into a medium-sized conference room. There were 3 people waiting: HR, a department head, and someone from legal. Each one wore a practiced smile. The first 10 minutes of the interview went smoothly. They asked about her work ethic, her coding certifications, her adaptability. Riley answered carefully, honestly. She could feel her confidence rising like a fragile balloon trying to reach air. Then came the moment she had learned to dread. One of the interviewers leaned forward slightly, hands folded. "We've reviewed your resume, but we also ran a background check." Riley's heartbeat slowed, not stopped, just braced. She nodded. "Yes, I expected that." The air in the room shifted slightly colder. "It shows a conviction, financial fraud, 2 years served. Do you care to elaborate?" Riley looked them in the eyes. No anger, no defensiveness, just truth. "I was 24. I worked as a junior accountant for a startup. I trusted the wrong person, my boyfriend at the time. He used my credentials to authorize transfers. When the investigation came, he disappeared. I had no proof to defend myself, no money for a better lawyer, and I had signed documents I didn't understand." Silence, she continued, quieter now. "I went to prison. 2 years. My mother died while I was there. I missed the funeral, and when I got out, I decided I wouldn't let that be the end of my story." One of the panelists cleared his throat. Another looked at her resume again, no longer with interest, but with calculation. "I've worked part-time jobs since," Riley added. "No one wanted to take a chance, but I didn't stop learning. I've earned 3 new certifications, taught coding to kids at a community center. I've stayed out of trouble. I've done the work." The air felt thick now. No one spoke. Behind the glass wall, Ethan watched. Every word, every pause. This wasn't just a story. It was a confession wrapped in courage, and she had told it not to gain sympathy, but because she refused to lie. Riley left the room 10 minutes later, shoulders squared. They had thanked her, said they'd be in touch. The words meant nothing. She knew the tone. Outside the building, she stood under the awning again. The rain had stopped. The clouds were beginning to break. She stared at the traffic, wondering if she had enough change for the bus, or if she'd be walking home again. Behind her from the executive floor, Ethan Vale stood with his arms crossed, watching her through the tall windows. He remembered her voice. "I've been the one lying on the ground. I know how it feels." That voice didn't beg. It didn't blame. It had simply helped. Ethan's jaw tightened. He pressed a button on the intercom and said just 2 words. "Hold her file." The conference room felt colder the second time Riley sat inside it. Maybe it was the air conditioning. Maybe it was the shift in tone. She sat straight, her hands folded calmly on the table, even though she could feel her knuckles tightening every time someone glanced at the final page of her file. 3 interviewers remained. Monica from HR, Davis from the tech team, and a senior legal counsel named Barrett. They had started off cordial, friendly even. They complimented her code samples, her community work, her answers about team collaboration and problem solving. "I like how you mapped out the data reconciliation for that non-profit project," Davis had said. "Clean logic, efficient." Riley had nodded, grateful, but now all eyes had shifted, and so had the energy. Barrett spoke first. "Ms. Morgan, we've reviewed your credentials, and I won't deny they're strong, but there's another matter." Riley nodded, already knowing where this was headed. He tapped the folder. "Your conviction." A pause. Riley inhaled, then looked him directly in the eye. "Yes, I was convicted of financial fraud 3 years ago. I served 2 years. No one moved." Davis flipped his pen between his fingers. Riley continued. Her voice didn't waver. "I didn't do what they said I did. I was native. I trusted someone I shouldn't have, but the system didn't care about that. I signed things I didn't understand. And when everything collapsed, he disappeared. I stayed, and I paid." Barrett leaned back. "But you were released early for good behavior," she said. "I spent every day learning, teaching. I left prison with a coding certification and a job waiting tables. I've been clean since. And more than that, I've been present for my work, for the kids I mentored, for myself." Another pause. "I'm not here to erase my past," she added more softly now. "I'm here to prove it didn't destroy me." Monica looked down, her fingers playing with the edge of the folder. Davis looked uncertain. Barrett crossed his arms. "We're a high-profile firm. We deal with sensitive data, large clients. It's not just about what you've done, Miss Morgan. It's about perception, trust." "I understand," Riley said. "I just ask that you judge me by what I've built after the fall, not the moment I fell." The silence returned. It stretched longer this time. Finally, Monica cleared her throat. "Thank you, Riley. We appreciate your transparency and your time." That was the line, the polite dismissal. She stood, nodded once, and collected her things. "Will I be hearing from you?" she asked gently. Barrett answered first. "We'll let you know after we've reviewed all final candidates." Davis didn't meet her eyes. Monica gave a tight smile. "Thank you again." Riley stepped out of the room, her back straight, but her shoulders slightly lower than when she walked in. She walked through the lobby of Valecore, her reflection passing over glass and chrome. Her stomach growled again, but she ignored it. Outside, the drizzle had started again, light, persistent. She didn't open her umbrella. She let the water hit her skin as she walked down the steps, the city swallowing her again. Somewhere behind her, on a higher floor, Ethan Vale had been watching. He didn't say a word, but his jaw tightened, and his decision had already started to form. Ethan sat alone in his office, the city's skyline spread out behind him like a painting of unreachable lights. But his attention stayed on the manila folder in front of him, the one labeled Riley Morgan. He had watched the interview footage twice. The way she held her ground, the way her voice didn't beg but explained, the way she didn't flinch even when silence was used as a weapon. He tapped a finger lightly on her resume. Then with a sharp breath, he picked up the phone and dialed. "Legal," answered a voice. "This is Ethan Vale. I need a full background verification on Riley Morgan, not just the conviction. I want the court transcripts, public defender notes, and any open civil suits tied to the case." There was a pause on the other end. "Yes, sir." Right away he hung up and stared again at her photo clipped to the top of the file. Blonde hair, a calm smile that almost didn't fit the story beneath it. A few hours later, the report arrived. Ethan read every page, and what he found was worse than he expected. The boyfriend, Shah Ramsey, had been under investigation for 3 other financial crimes, all dropped due to lack of evidence. Riley's name had been the only one attached to signed authorizations. Her legal defense had been almost non-existent, no follow-up investigation after her release, and no real attempt to prove her innocence until now. Ethan closed the folder, exhaled slowly, and picked up his cell. The voice that answered was older but strong. "Ethan, everything okay?" "Hey, Dad," Ethan said. "Got a minute for you always?" He paused. "Do you remember when you told me business isn't just about profit? It's about the people you build it with?" His father chuckled. "That sounds like me. Why?" Ethan looked at the photo again. "I think I met one of those people in the rain holding a sandwich." There was silence on the line, then the gentle hum of curiosity. "Tell me." Ethan did. Not every detail, but enough. When he finished, his father said quietly, "Sounds like it's time to see what kind of leader you really want to be." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, I think it is." The next morning, a meeting request was sent to the hiring committee. Mandatory presence required. The room filled slowly, more murmuring than usual. The atmosphere in the conference room was uncertain, as if the air itself had paused to listen. The hiring committee sat around the polished table, resumes and background checks laid out in neat stacks, but none of the papers felt neat anymore. Not after Riley. Barrett from legal cleared his throat, flipping Riley's file closed with a quiet snap. Her answers were strong, no doubt, but the conviction, we just can't ignore that. Monica from HR looked conflicted, and yet she owned every part of it. Didn't deflect, didn't excuse. That means something, but does it mean enough? Davis murmured, rubbing the back of his neck. This is Vale Corp. We cannot afford to risk reputation over compassion. It was then that the door opened. All heads turned. Ethan Vale stepped in, his presence filling the room without a word. He wore no jacket. His sleeves rolled casually, but his gaze was focused, sharp. In his hand was something small, worn, slightly damp at the edges. He walked slowly to the center of the table and placed it down. A flattened, empty sandwich box, the deli label faint but visible. No one spoke. Ethan looked up at the room. His voice, when it came, was quiet, but it carried. "Before you make any decision," he said, "let me tell you who Riley really is." The tension in the room shifted like a curtain lifting. 3 days ago, I slipped and fell outside a corner store hard. People passed. No one stopped. No one even looked. He tapped the sandwich box gently with his finger, except one person. He didn't rush. She came out of nowhere. She helped me up without asking my name. She saw I'd lost my food. So she walked into that store, spent her last few dollars. Yes, I checked and came back with this sandwich and a bottle of water. She handed them to me like it was the most natural thing in the world. Barrett shifted. You're saying that was her? Ethan nodded. She didn't know I was CEO. She didn't even recognize me. She just saw someone who needed help, and she acted. Monica's eyes widened. Davis blinked. Ethan continued, his voice firmer now. When I asked her why she did it, she said, I've been the one lying on the ground. I know how it feels. The words echoed for a moment, hanging in the stillness. She didn't try to sell me a story. She didn't ask for anything in return, and she didn't know that act would bring her here. But I did, and I watched her in that interview room. I watched her own her past and carry it with dignity. Barrett interjected, cautious. But Ethan, what about public perception? Clients, investors? Ethan turned to him. Perception is built on precedent. We said it. We define it. We can be a company that shuts out people with scars, or we can be one that recognizes healing takes courage. He walked to the head of the table and folded his arms. As of today, I'm launching the Second Chance Initiative, a hiring policy designed to evaluate people based not only on their past, but on what they've done to rise from it. He looked around the table, letting his words land. Riley Morgan is the first, but not the last. Davis let out a low breath. You're serious? Ethan offered a thin smile. Dead serious. If we can build rockets that land themselves, we can build a company culture that knows how to forgive. He turned toward the door, then paused. She starts Monday, he said. Make sure she has a desk and a chance. And with that, he walked out, leaving behind the empty sandwich box. But to those still sitting in the room, it felt like he had left something far heavier, a mirror and a choice. On her first day at Vale Corp, Riley stood alone in the elevator, her badge clipped neatly to her jacket, a new notebook tucked under one arm. The elevator dinged softly at each floor. She could feel her nerves curling like smoke under her skin. When the doors opened, a handful of employees glanced up. Some nodded, others barely looked. A few whispered as she passed. By lunchtime, the tension was clear. Whispers at the coffee station, the unspoken distance during team stand-up. She wasn't just the new hire, she was the one with the story. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with discomfort, a few with judgment. She kept her head down, did her work, said thank you more than necessary, laughed only when it felt safe. That afternoon, a small package arrived at her desk. Inside was a leather-bound journal. On the cover, embossed in silver, were the words, "From fall to flight." No sender name, but a note was tucked inside. Every comeback begins with one person who keeps walking. Welcome to your flight. Mike Riley smiled, biting her lip. She opened to the first page. It was blank, an invitation to begin again. A few days later, she was invited quietly to a lunch session hosted by the company's mentorship program. She almost didn't go, but something in her pushed her feet toward the conference room. To her surprise, the room was bright and casual. A few senior employees, some newer hires, Ethan standing at the back, unobtrusive, not speaking, just watching. You looked like you needed it. She brushed a hand through her tousled hair, embarrassed. I was just reviewing for tomorrow. You've earned a rest, he said, smiling gently. Come on, I'll drive you home. The car rolled through quiet city streets, jazz humming low from the stereo. A soft cinnamon cedar scent drifted from a diffuser clipped to the vent. Riley sat with her hands in her lap, fighting the weight behind her eyes. You can rest, Ethan said, eyes on the road. "We've got a while." "I'm fine," she replied softly. But 5 minutes later, her head dipped against the seat. Sleep claimed her without a fight. Ethan glanced over. The streetlights glowed across her face in soft gold. A strand of hair had fallen across her cheek, fluttering slightly with each breath. His hand moved almost on its own, lifted gently, hesitating near her face. He didn't know why he did it, only that something in him longed to smooth that hair away, not for appearance, not for comfort, but because somehow she had become someone he didn't want the world to bruise again. Just as his fingers neared her cheek, her eyes blinked open. They both froze. Riley sat up slowly. Ethan withdrew his hand, eyes forward again. "Sorry," he said, clearing his throat. "Your hair just got in your face." She looked at him, cheeks slightly pink. "Oh, right." She turned to face the window, but neither spoke again, and neither could quite ignore the thrum in their chests. When they reached her building, Ethan stepped out and opened her door. Riley stepped out slowly, the night air cool against her skin. She turned back to him, hesitating. "Thanks," she said, "for tonight, the tea, the coat, and everything." He smiled, his voice quiet. "You'd do the same." She nodded, then slipped inside. As the door closed behind her, Ethan stood on the sidewalk a moment longer, staring after the light behind her apartment window. And in that still night, neither of them slept. 1 year later, Vale Corp looked different, not just in policy or performance, but in spirit. The walls felt warmer, the voices in the halls more sincere, and at the center of it all stood a woman once dismissed by the world, now standing in front of a national conference banner that read, "Faces of Cultural Transformation, Building Companies that Forgive and Flourish." Riley's photo was on every press handout. Her name trended on professional forums. Articles called her the symbol of second chances. But for her, it was never about being the symbol. It was about being seen. She stood backstage, her hands clasped lightly in front of her, heart beating fast as the host read her name. And now, please welcome the woman whose courage inspired one of the most progressive hiring movements in our industry, Riley Morgan. Applause thundered, cameras flashed. Riley stepped onto the stage with quiet grace, her blonde hair catching the soft light like gold thread. She didn't read a script. She never did. "I used to think," she began, "that redemption had to be earned through perfection, that you had to do something extraordinary to undo the worst chapter of your life. But I was wrong." She scanned the crowd. "You don't need to be perfect. You just need someone to believe the best parts of you still exist and are worth the risk." She paused, then smiled softly. "For me, that someone wore a wrinkled shirt, held an empty lunchbox, and decided a stranger's kindness was more valuable than a clean record." A few people laughed gently, some wiped at their eyes. I didn't have a polished resume or a polished past, but I had a heart that wanted to try again. That and a sandwich, she grinned, and the room broke into warm laughter and applause. Afterward, as the crowd slowly dispersed, Riley walked outside through the side entrance of the auditorium. The sky had turned a soft shade of peach, stree with fading sunlight. Ethan was waiting under a tree. He had skipped the spotlight as he always did, but he had been there all along, watching from the back row. He stepped forward now, hands in his pockets, eyes searching hers. "You were incredible," he said simply. Riley shrugged, half smiling. "I said what was true." They stood there for a moment, the soft breeze brushing past them. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, folded paper, familiar. Riley recognized it instantly. It was the note he had left in the journal, a year ago. Every comeback begins with one person who keeps walking. She touched it gently, moved. "I've watched you," Ethan said, voice low. "Not just succeed, but lift others with you. Change lives, mine included." Riley blinked, caught off guard by the emotion in his voice. "I never told you," Ethan continued, "but before that day, I was close to walking away from all of it, from this job, from this company. I'd lost faith in the people I was supposed to lead." He looked at her, eyes steady. "And then you helped me when you didn't have to." She smiled through tears. "I didn't have anything that day," she said quietly. "Just a sandwich." Ethan stepped closer. "But I guess," she added with a laugh, breaking through, "it was enough." He smiled. Then with no grand gestures, no dramatic pauses, just a voice filled with certainty, he said, "I've waited to say this for a long time. Riley, I'm in love with you." Her breath caught, and for a moment, all the noise, the doubts, the memories of prison bars and cold stares faded. She nodded slowly, voice barely above a whisper. "Me too." They stepped away from the building, hand in hand, walking into the open air. No audience, no cameras, just two people finally aligned. As they reached the edge of the parking lot, Riley looked up. The last rays of sun filtered through her hair, catching gold at the edges. And beside her, Ethan smiled, not because of the light, but because he knew that woman had once given him lunch. And now she had given him a reason to believe again. If this story moved your heart, made you believe again in second chances, or simply reminded you that even a small act of kindness can change everything, then you are exactly where you need to be. At Soul Stirring Stories, we bring you real, raw, and beautifully imagined tales that speak to the strength of the human spirit, the power of compassion, and the quiet courage it takes to start over. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that could change the way you see the world, even just a little. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes all it takes is a sandwich and someone who dares to see the good in you.